Alright guys, so I'm going to be teaching you guys about chapter 9, specifically 9.1 and 9.3. More on quadratic equations, but specifically two different properties or things that we can use to get to the final answer of our quadratic equations. So the first one is the square root property. So we're going to learn how to use the square root property, obviously. So we all know that there are multiple ways to get a number squared, or there's two different ways. You can do a negative number squared or a positive number squared, and you're going to get either of these choices are going to give you a positive answer because any number squared is positive. Okay? So we're kind of going to be doing like the reverse of this now. So it says if x squared equals a for any a that is greater than 0. So as long as our answer after it's been squared is positive, then x equals the square root of a, or x equals negative square root of a. Okay? So that's important. You're going to get the positive and the negative solution. So for our first example, we're going to do x squared equals 49, and if you don't know, the square root of 49 is 7. 7 squared is 49. So here you're going to get plus or minus. Plus or minus. You have to make sure that you do not forget that step because that's the whole point of this. So your answer is going to be 7 and negative 7 right here. So you get positive 7 and negative 7. Okay, so for this next example, all that's shown up right now is, for some reason, the answer. So we're just going to go ahead and go to this step. So we see 2x squared equals 4. So the very first step, you're just going to try and get that x squared by itself. In this first example up here, the x was already by itself. There was nothing else with it, but here we have a 2 with it. So we're going to need to divide both sides by 2. So then you get x squared equals 2, and then you take the square root of both sides. So the square root cancels out the squared, and you get x equals plus or minus the square root of 2. And since the square root of 2 is not a whole number, it's not just an easy number to find, we're just going to leave it there for now. So here's another example. This one's a little bit more complex. So whenever you have y minus 3, all of this squared, you're going to take the square root of the whole thing to contradict, to get rid of this squared. Okay, so once you take the square root, then you're just going to be left with y minus 3, and then you've got the plus or minus the root 4. So then after you do all that, then the next step would be to take the square root of this. So then you're left with plus or minus 2 because the square root of 4 is 2. So y minus 3 equals plus or minus 2. Then you're going to add this 3 to both sides. So y equals 3 plus or minus 2. So then I like to do, if you get confused, what you can do is you can draw yourself little lines. I like to do that so I don't get confused and I don't forget to do both. So y equals 3 plus 2, you go on the top, and then y equals 3 minus 2. So 3 plus 2 is 5, and 3 minus 2 is 1. So for this one, this is one of those examples where your a, where the equation x squared equals a, where your a was not greater than 0. It is negative 4, which means you can't take a square root of a negative number because right now all we know is that the square root of a negative number is no real solution. So this is what you would do for this one. So this is another one like we just did. So the first step is to take the square root of both sides. So you get x plus 2 equals the positive square root of 25 and the negative square root of 25. So you get x plus 2 equals plus or minus 5. Subtract your 2 over. X equals negative 2 plus 5. And then negative 2 minus 5. So you can go like this, like I did earlier. And you get 3 and 7 whenever you do all of that math. Here's another one. This one's a little bit different. So you're going to start out the same. You're going to take the square root of both sides. Then you get 3x minus 17 equals plus or minus square root of 28. But here they're wanting you to rationalize, not rationalize, that's not the, reduce, simplify the radical. Simplify the radical, not reduce or rationalize, whatever, ignore me. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys how I do this. I know different people learn different ways, and I just think that this is easier, so I just like to show people in case they do too. So I get my 28 and I put a little box around it, and I know 28 is an even number, so the smallest number that's going to go into 28 is 2. So I put 2 right there, and then 2 divided by 28 is 14, so I put 14 down here. And now I create another box. 14, also divisible by 2. So put a 2 there. 2 divided by 14 is 7. And 7 is a prime number, so you're going to be left over with that 7, but 2 times 2, there's 2 of those, so no, basically it's saying 2 is squared. I circle all my ones that are in sets of 2s, and then you know you're going to bring one of those out. So you're going to have 2 on the outside, and then a 7 in the radical. So that's how we get to here. So then you just add your 17 to the other side. So you get 17 plus 2 root 7, 17 minus 2 root 7. But then this x still has a 3 with it, so then you're supposed to divide both sides by 3. So then you're left with x equals 17 plus or minus 2 root 7 over 3, which is very ugly. But that's as far as we'll go, and that is right. So if you get to an answer like that and you're like, this doesn't seem right, it is, don't worry. So objective 2. This is just using the square root property to solve applications. So it says use the formula h equals 16t squared to find how long to the nearest tenth of a second it takes a free falling body to fall 650 feet. Then it says understand, use the formula where t is the time in seconds and h is the distance traveled by a free falling body or object. So in this question, it's asking us how long it'll take, what the time is, for a free falling body to fall 650 feet. So if we let t equals 5, and h equals 16 times 5 squared equals 16 times 25 equals 400, we then know that free fall will last more than 5 seconds. So now we're going to solve the equation to actually figure out, to translate, to use the formula. So h now is going to be your 650 because that's how high the body is falling from. That's what we need to know, the height, or that's what we know. So 650 equals 16t squared. Then you're going to solve that. So in order to get t by itself, you got to divide by 16 on both sides. And then you get t squared equals 650 over 16. Then you do that in your calculator because nobody really knows that off the top of their head. And then you get positive root 40.625 and negative 40.625. So the answers are approximately 6.4 and negative 6.4. However, this problem is asking for time. So if you're thinking in terms of time, you're never going to think negative time because that's not really a thing. So that's how we know the answer was positive 6.4 because negative 6.4 makes no sense. Okay, now we're going to get into the quadratic formula. We're going to use the quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. So it says the formula is derived from completing the square of a general quadratic equation. This is just how to derive the formula. This isn't, I don't think, what we're going to need to know. I think we're just going to be out solving it. This is literally just how you get it. So if a, b, and c are real numbers, and a doesn't equal 0, a quadratic equation written in the standard form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 has solutions. And then here's the quadratic formula. So this is important. Let's go back. If you don't know this, learn it. There are songs on YouTube. So if you have to learn this and memorize it, you will need it in the future. You will. You might not in your major, but I'm sure it'll pop up in your future at some point. Maybe your kids will do it in high school. I don't know, but you're going to need to know it. So you might as well just learn the song. It's really cheesy, but then you're never going to forget it and you're going to have it forever. So just type in quadratic formula song on YouTube and it's funny. I would not sing it because that would be bad, but okay. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a few examples. So it says solve 2x squared minus x minus 5 equals 0 using the quadratic formula. So we know, I keep doing that. This is your ax squared plus bx plus c. Doesn't matter that they're negative, we'll incorporate that down here. So you see a equals 2, b equals -1, -1 is in front of that x, and c equals -5. Okay, so then you just plug it in, but you have to be very, very careful with your parentheses. Right now, just do it by hand. So, x equals -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So, x equals -b. Make sure whenever you plug in this -1 here, you put it in parentheses, otherwise you're gonna miss this. You're gonna just get a -1 instead of a -1, which is a +1, if that makes sense. So make sure when you put these in where they're supposed to go that you use parentheses. That is very important. So -1 plus or minus square root b squared, again the parentheses are important. You square 1 negative parenthesis 1 parenthesis squared, that's not going to be the same as a -1 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times -5, which is c, all over, every bit of it's divided by 2 times a, so 2 times 2. And then you do that math. -1 times a -1 is a 1, plus or minus 1, -1 squared is 1, and then -4 times 2 times -5 is 40, all over 4, so then you get 1 plus or minus the square root of 41 over 4, and since the square root of 41 is not a pretty number, we leave it there, and that's your answer. So now here's another example. A n squared plus bn plus c. Oh, your c is over there. What are you going to do? You're going to subtract it over, so it's really going to be a -1. Let's already here. 11n squared minus 9n minus 1 equals 0. A, B, C. So you see a equals 11, b equals -9, and c equals -1. And then you just plug it into the formula. So your b is 9. No, your b is -9, which would turn into a +9. Like that just got us, it would be like this again, which would just be positive. So 9 plus or minus the square root of -9 squared minus 4 times times a, which is 11, times -1, all over 2 times 11. And then you do that math, and I highly suggest if you have a calculator typing in all of that, like -9 squared equals 81, and then -4 times 11 times -1, so you don't get that wrong, because that is going to be a common mistake if you are just trying to zoom through these. So use your calculator with the parentheses if you can, and be very careful. So then once you do that math, you get 9 plus or minus the square root of 125 over 22. Again, I'll do this again so you can see another example of how I do. So the smallest number that goes into 125 is 5. And that's going to be 25 divided by 5 is 5. So you have 2 5s and then a 5 left over. So it's going to be 5 root 5. And that's how we get there. 9 plus or minus 5 root 5 over 22. So you get, here's where we split it apart. So you get 9 plus 5 root 5 over 22 and 9 minus 5 root 5 over 22. And both of those answers are the answers. So here is just step by step of how you would do it. So step number 1, you're going to write it in standard form. So like in that last example right here where we had to move this 1 over, that's what they're talking about. So just make sure it's in that standard form. Then step number 2, if necessary, clear the equation of fractions to simplify calculations. So like if you had a 1/2, you would want to multiply the whole thing by 2 to get that away. Just make sure it's all simple, there's no fractions, nothing like that that's going to keep you from making silly mistakes later. Step number 3, identify your ABC, which is what we did in the last few steps. Step 4, replace A, B, and C in the quadratic formula with the identified values and simplify. Here's another example. So x squared plus 6x plus 30 equals 0. So again, A, B, C. So you get negative 6 plus or minus 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 30 all over 2. Negative 6 plus or minus 36 minus 120. And then you see there that there is a negative underneath the radical. So that's as far as we'll go on this problem because that's a non-real answer. No real solution. Okay, so this is one of the tricky ones where you're going to need to do a couple things before you actually identify your ABC. Multiply both sides by 8. And then you'll get x squared, because that cancels out the 1/8. So we can do times 8 times 8 times 8. So it would be x squared plus 8x, and then here 8 divided by 2 is 4. So 5 times 4 is 20. X squared plus 8x minus 20. So you get 1 as your A, 8 as your B, and then negative 20 as your C. And then you just plug all that stuff in. Negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 20 all over 2 times 1 equals negative 8 plus or minus square root of 64 plus 80 over 2. Negative 8 plus or minus square root of 144 over 2. Square root of 144 is perfect square. It is 12. 12 squared is 144, so negative 8 plus 12 over 2. Negative 8 minus 12 over 2. So then you're going to get negative 20 over 2 or 4 over 2, so negative 10 and 2. So I'm going to write that out because that kind of looks confusing if you're not careful. Negative 8 plus 12 over 2 or negative 8 minus 12 over 2. Negative 8 plus 12 is 4. And then negative 8 minus 12 is a negative 20 over 2. So that's how these answers how those answers got there. Okay, so this next section, approximate solutions to quadratic equations. approximate the exact solutions of 12x equals 4x squared plus 4, round to the nearest tenth. So the very first thing that we're going to be doing here is factoring out the greatest common factor. That's the first thing you look for whenever you're doing quadratics, the greatest common factor to make your life easier. So take that 4 out of each number. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 12 divided by 4 is negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So then your A, you would just do it the same. You would just kind of ignore that 4 for now. So A equals 1, B equals negative 3, and C equals 1. Plug those in just like before. You get 3 plus or minus square root of 9 minus 4 over 2. 3 plus or minus root 5 over 2. So you would get approximately 0.4 and 2.6. Those are the approximate solutions. Using the discriminant. So the part underneath the square root is what the discriminant is, and we can use that, and we will know, depending on what kind of number you get, the type of solutions for the quadratic equation. So the part under the square root is b squared minus 4ac, and you can either have a positive number, a negative number, or you can have 0. So if it's positive, you are then going to have 2 distinct real solutions. If it's 0, you're going to have 1 real solution, and if it's negative, you're going to have no real solutions. And that'll make more sense in more examples that you do probably. So use the discriminant to determine the number of solutions of 5x squared plus 2x minus 3. So you see b squared minus 4ac is the only piece of the quadratic formula that we need, and we're just looking to see if it's positive, negative, or 0. So 3 squared minus 4 times 5 times negative 3, 9 plus 60, that's a positive number. 69 is a positive number, which means we are going to have 2 distinct real solutions. So now we're going to do it again with x squared plus 2x plus 2. b squared minus 4ac, that gives you 4 minus 8, which is negative 4. So that would be a negative 4 underneath the radical, which means that we have no real solutions. This next example, use the discriminant to determine the number of solutions of x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 0. b squared minus 4ac, that'd be 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1. You're literally, okay, just to go a little bit further, if in case you're not getting it, the b, this b, you're going to plug in to this b. The a is going to go here, and then your c is going to go here. You're seriously just plugging in the numbers that you found here. Here, let me do that color. You're finding those numbers there. So you're going to plug those numbers into the formula where they go. So that's all that's happening between here and here. You're just plugging in numbers, those numbers, and then you are just solving it. So 4 minus 4, that's 0. So your discriminant is 0. So you have 1 real solution. So something like that would be, it would look like this in the end, like 4 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 2. Square root of 0 is 0, so you're seriously just doing 4 over 2, which equals 2. So that's what it means by there's only going to be 1 solution, because the square root of 0 is 0. So you're adding and subtracting nothing. So you're just going to have a 1 real solution. So that's the end of the slideshow. I do want to say before I get off of this video, since I never get to see you guys anymore, I don't know if I even said that who I was teaching. I'm Maddie, your IA, and I have Zoom hours from 5 to 7 on Wednesday nights, and I sit here and wait on you guys to come and ask me for help. And I know you guys have questions because you had a ton of questions in class, so I'm offended. Come see me in my Zoom hours, and I will help you, and it'll be fun.